right now we're heading to the race shop of a guy named Paul Spruell, who is an Alfa Romeo expert. I believe his family owned an Alfa Romeo dealership here. When the franchise went away, you know, when Alfa Romeo left the U.S. market, they remained an Alfa Romeo repair shop, race shop, build racing engines. And I believe he's got some relics from the past lying around. And so in an effort to bring more youthful cars to this episode, you know, his Alfa Romeos, you know, so we're not looking at cars in the 30s and 40s, we're talking about cars in the 60s and 70s. Well, that's our next find. Ha! Holy mackerel. Look at that lowered van. Oh, it's a blast. When we decided to come to the Atlanta area and look for cars that were newer than the cars we find very often from the 40s and 50s, one of the first people I called was Paul Spruell. Paul is an Alfa Romeo expert, racer, parts seller, and didn't your family own the Alfa Romeo dealership in this city?
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What years did you own that dealership?
1980 through 93 when they pulled out. They pulled out in 94.
Pulled out in 94, okay.
We started in 1980, and 1982 we were, the next year we were 10th in sales.
In the country?
Yeah.
Huh.
In the next year we were 5th. In the next year we were 1st. And we were the largest selling dealer 5 different years, always in the top 10.
Man.
And we sold more Alfas than anybody in the history of Alfa in the USA. Until now, of course, I'm sure they sold a lot more cars.
And so they didn't pull out of the U.S. market because of you. You probably did your fair share in keeping them here.
So we were doing great. We begged them to stay. And they said, oh, we'll be back in 5 years. No, if you leave, you'll never be back.
Wow. So in addition to selling new Alfas, I guess you sold used ones, repairs, parts, and the race team. Now you're a SCCA national champion in E-production?
Yeah.
What year?
Well, G-production in 69, E-production 85, 86, and 88.
So 4-time national champ. I've never met a 4-time champ. Jeez, that's pretty cool. And so you told me you have some old cars sitting around the back of the building.
Yes.
I'd love to see those.
All right. Go on.
So this was your race car you won 3 championships in?
Right.
And it's been crashed since when?
93.
93.
Yeah.
Now you're just getting around to fixing it?
Yeah.
Did this start off as a new car, or was it a used car? You made a race car out of it?
It was a Duetto. I ran it at Sebring in 1970.
We'll see if you've had this a few years.
Yeah. This corner was taken off, suspension and everything.
At Road Atlanta?
Yeah. I was 10 feet up in the air backwards and going upside down. It landed on 4 wheels. That's an old 66 Spider Veloce. And it was a real barn find. I had a towing service for the Alfa dealership. And one day this driver I didn't even know calls me up and says, I got an old Alfa.
Alfa.
And I fixed to take it to the, crusher and wonder if you wanted it. I said, well, drive by and I'll let you know. And there was this bare chassis. I said, what do you want? He says, $100.
Now explain to me the Alfas. I get so mixed up with Giuliettas and what's the theory? Like sedans and roadsters, women's names. How does that work out?
Giulietta is Little Jewel.
Okay.
And that was the 1300s back in the 50s.
Okay.
Up through 62 was the Giulietta Spiders and Sprints and Berlinas, Zagatos, and Sprint Specials. Then they went to Giulia, which is just a regular Jewel, I guess. And that was the 1600s. That catches you up to now. And now they're starting to use some of the old names.
Right, okay. Well, that explains it. This is a great sedan. So this is a Giulia, which means it's a 1600.
Yes, there's a TI Julia Super, and TI Super. This is the middle one. It's got the Webers and the.
Oh man.
It needs an engine. I just wore it out.
This is a daily driver kind of car?
Yes.
What a great color.
This was the color of the police cars. Remember the original Italian job?
Yep. Oh yeah. Right. Tell us the story of Froggy.
Froggy, this was the factory, the Alfa factory rep for the Southeast. This was his demonstrator. He sold it to Baker Motor Company, which was a local dealer. And they sold it to a friend of mine, and I started working on it. Instead of trading it in, I bought it from him and drove it for, 3 or 4 years. I sold it, and the guy turned it into a race car and raced it. I've got a picture of it running at Road Atlanta, and raced it for a couple of years and sold it to somebody for the street. It was this color when it was raced. That was the original color, the baby blue.
Yep.
They made a zillion of them. And he painted it bright green. And when they brought it to us to service it, I was just amazed.
What are you asking for this car?
I think I've got 7,200 on it.
With an engine?
With the engine.
And the gearbox?
Oh yeah. I'll stick everything back in it.
Is the floor sound in it? I see the body's got some issues.
Go ahead and open the door. The floors are solid.
Yeah.
I mean, they got some rust on them, but they're,
Yeah.
they're not perforated or anything.
Is that an SCCA legal roll cage today, do you think?
Today, it still is. It needs some bars going to the front suspension. That keeps the engine and suspension from getting in your lap, like the yellow car protected me.
So this would be a good starting point for a vintage race car for sure.
Yeah.
Man. So this Spider here, what about this one here? That's what they call the bow tail?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a Duetto. And
Which means what?
2 of everything. 2 Webers, 2 seats, 2 wiper blades, 2 headlights.
2 camshafts, 2-seater.
Yes.
Okay.
They had a contest in Italy to name this car, and Duetto won.
Really? Wow. So what year is this?
This is 68, 67 or 68.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought it for, of all things, for the deck lid.
Which is now gone.
Yeah. When I wrecked the Duetto out there, the deck lid flew off.
Oh.
And I had to go pick up pieces. And the guy that made it is fiberglass. The guy that made it was no longer around.
Yeah. And this is a for sale car?
Oh, I'd be happy to sell it. Now that I've got a deck lid.
Mm-hmm. The last on the road is 87, it looks like.
1987, came from Jacksonville, Florida.
So it's got a little bit of cancer popping around here and there.
It's restorable
Yep.
if somebody wants to do it, and they're well worth doing. The way you can, judge a car is the floorboards and the wheel well. And you see, they're sound.
Yep.
So if you got good floorboards and wheel wells, the rest of it's superfluous.
Yep.
Actually, Alfa Pininfarina would very often forget to paint or prime the backside. And in any conditions, they're going to rust.
Yep.
So that was a problem.
So that's a big trunk. If you look for a little sports car, this had a long deck on it.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah. And so how much is that car?
Couple of thousand. With the deck lid back on it.
With the, so for 12 grand, you can have all 3. And
Yeah.
we could take a problem off of your hands and give it to somebody else. So this is a parts car?
This is a sad car.
Oh, okay. Oh,
It is so straight,
really?
but the rockers and stuff in the floors. The reason the doors are nice is the fact that he took the doors and the hood and the deck lid off and put the car outside.
This is a GTV?
Yes, 66 Julia.
So the GTV was a 2-door sport coupe. We saw inside the sports cars, 2-seater roadsters, the 4-door sedans. This was the sports coupe. This is what ran in the 2.5-liter Trans Am series against 510s and BMWs. So the doors were, and the hood and the trunk were left inside, and this was outside.
Yeah, it's got new wheels on it. It was mired down into sand, and I bought the Duetto, and I couldn't walk away from it.
Yeah. So is that restorable?
Yeah,
I mean, there's lots of little stuff going on here and there.
lots of detail has to be done.
Yeah.
But all the panels are available. You can get I think 2,000 will buy every panel on here that it needs.
Wow. And what are you asking for this?
I got 4,200 on it, but I'm flexible.
As a complete car?
Well, just like it is.
Just
the
like
shell.
it is, okay. Okay.
What you have to do is get a donor car, and you've got all the pieces.
Yeah, what's the value of this car? 40,000 maybe when it's done? And you could either have lots more than that into it, I'm sure.
This is called a step nose.
Yep.
And this is the most valuable of the cars, you see.
Explain why this is called a step nose and why they did that.
I don't know why they did that.
Cooling, do you think?
I think just styling.
Okay.
I think it's just a design feature.
If you look at this, there's a step here between the hood and this front cowling. You would imagine it to be flush, but for some reason Alfa decided to have it like this, matching this character line there.
Subsequent models, they smoothed it in.
Yeah, yeah. I've invited you to my car party for like 20 years now.
Yes.
And I think Dan McCrary, a mutual friend, has also invited you. So I'll take this, I'll give you a rain check for this October.
I'll be there.
All right, cool.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Been a pleasure.
Paul Spruill, what a neat guy. You know, self-taught, successful national championship racer, machinist, engine builder. So now we're going to go see somebody, another young man who's into imported cars that are, you know, 30 years old, 40 years old. I think you'll enjoy meeting him. So our idea to come to Atlanta was to find youthful car collectors, people that collected either cars that were newer than what I would think would be an old car, or people that were young and into collecting cars. So you got to understand, when I walk into a garage, I see a 30s car, or 40s car, or 50s car, or 60s car, I can relate to it because I was either born during those times or I read about them. So old hot rods from the 30s mean a lot to me. But people who were born, you know, in the 90s, what cars do they relate to? We're going to meet a guy now that collects cars, a younger guy, who actually means a lot to me because he's my son. I want to introduce you to Brian Cotter.
Hello.
And Brian lives and works in Atlanta and has his own little collection of barn find cars, both here and there's a couple more at home. You got to get those out of the garage, by the way, because it's getting to be a drag. So rather than me, you know, talk about these cars, I'll let Brian say. I think the more interesting one is this one right here, a Mazda RX-7. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about this?
Yeah, sure. So this is a 1993 RX-7. This was purchased originally in North Carolina by a farmer, pretty cool farmer, I guess. So I guess he saw this this car advertised in some pamphlet, went to a local Mazda dealership, Mazda of Concord, North Carolina, I believe. Wanted to go in and buy it, but wanted to make sure he liked the car before he took it for a drive. Put down a deposit for the car, took it for a 2,000-mile test drive to Florida and back. Arrived back in Concord, paid the remainder of the amount of money he owed on the car, and took it home. And he owned it until I purchased it maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it's a 1993. He drove it regularly throughout the 90s. In the late 90s, he started parking it for longer periods of time. You can see on the windshield it was last registered in 2009. I think that's fairly generous because the condition that it was in when we found it inside the basement of his farmhouse was pretty rough.
How many miles are on it?
That is a good question. These cars have notoriously picky electronic systems, which is kind of funny for a Japanese car. The gauge cluster is digital, or the odometer is digital, and those LEDs have burned out. So the last service on the car, I believe, is a sticker in the windshield. It's something like 44,000 miles, but that's one of the things I haven't been able to get working yet.
Do you think it wasn't 50,000?
I think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, for people watching this who don't know how special this car is, maybe you want to pop the hood and talk about mechanically what makes this car pretty special. By the way, when I go to the big junkyard in the sky, this is probably going to be the host of Barn Find Hunter.
So nothing too crazy. This is actually completely stock RX-7 engine, which is fairly unusual for a third generation RX-7. A lot of people saw Fast and the Furious or one of those movies and put giant turbos on these, but this is what it should look like if the car is completely stock. This has what's called a 13V rotary engine, so it's roughly 1300 cc's, twin rotor, twin turbo, and what's kind of cool about this engine is it's a sequential turbocharger system. So there's a turbo that spools pretty quickly at low RPMs, and then there's a larger turbo that spools at higher RPMs. So it's kind of an interesting experience driving this car. There's a surge of power, there's a long delay, and then another surge of power as the second turbo kicks on. So.
But you put some competition history on this.
Yes, in 2015, I guess it was, I entered this in just about every autocross event I could find in the Atlanta area. It's in a very competitive class. It's an A Street, which goes against Z06 Corvettes and M4 BMWs. It's completely outclassed, but I ended up winning the championship that year, which is kind of cool. And I made it through the entire season without blowing up, which is pretty rare, I guess, for these cars when they're sold. And it's really taken no extra maintenance whatsoever, which is kind of nice. For autocrossing, the only things that I did to it that are not factory, I put a different set of shocks in, which are Koni adjustable sport shocks. They're basically a factory equivalent, but you can adjust the stiffness ever so slightly. And I put a K&N filter in, but other than that, it's completely factory.
And so you wound up winning the championship against new or newer Corvettes.
Yeah.
With a car that has antique plates on it. So like what? If you think about a rotary engine, it's the simplest design. There's no valves, there's no pistons, there's no connecting rods, there's no crankshaft, no camshaft. There are basically two rotors in this engine, and they spin around, and it's kind of a triangular looking piece in a circular piece. So fuel and air come in, they produce power, they're exhausted. And that's all it is. There's only really, is there two moving pieces?
I think 3 moving parts.
3 moving pieces in this motor. It's just an amazing design. And as you know, if you remember the Jim Downing episode, we went to his shop, his whole career is based on race cars that have a variation of this motor in it. So, you know, there's no rods, there's no valves, it's just a quiet engine that goes literally. If you think about the old Mazda commercials, a Mazda goes, that's what it does. There's nothing to make noise. So this design, it's almost like a skin stretched over a bare chassis. There's only enough room for the engine, 2 occupants, not much more than that. There's not wasted space. The car was designed. Form follows function, and the function was to be a lightweight, maneuverable, fast, and fun sports car. There's no extra gook hanging off this car. It's an amazing piece of work. Is there a story with this one? I mean, I know it, but I don't want to say everything.
So this is my 911. It's a 1985. This is a gray market import car. I was looking for a Porsche that I could afford when I was in college, which is fairly difficult, but it was before Porsches got crazy in price. So what did I want? I wanted a red 930 turbo coupe. What could I afford? I could afford a gray market, red, I guess minimally original, somewhat damaged 911 Targa. So that's what I ended up getting. The car needed engine work when I got it. It obviously needs a few things like a Targa top resurfacing. It's not so bad if you take the top off, so it looks
Well, yeah, so a Targa, I mean, in case you don't know, you take this off and it becomes a semi-convertible, and the back window stays in place, and this Targa bar. So it's kind of half a coupe and half a convertible.
Yeah, it's the advantages of both and the disadvantages of both, I've learned over time. But I purchased this from the widow of a guy who bought this car, I guess in the mid-90s. Huge amounts of receipts came with the car, but ultimately he didn't drive it for, I don't know, close to a decade. It sat in a garage. It seemed like someone at some point had put diesel gas in the engine. I'm not really sure why that was. So had to get the gas tank boiled out, if you remember that. And then ultimately had to rebuild the engine because the valve guides and valve seals were so bad in the car. So with a little bit of work, we were able to bring this out of I guess, a fairly extended rest in someone's garage.
So you have a small 2-car garage, and you have 3 cars in it. So
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting story as well.
The third car in the 2-car garage is it's a Formula V. Currently, it doesn't have the bodywork on it. Bodywork I have stashed in another spot in the basement. But Formula V, if you're not familiar, is a class of open wheel racing that was popular in the early to mid to late 60s, I guess, and even to this day, but in a little bit of a modified format. But it's a cool class of open wheel racing. This is a vintage car, so this is a 1967 or 1968. The car was built by a guy who was just a fan of racing, lived in North Carolina. He saw someone racing these cars, wanted to build his own. He bought the blueprints for what was known as a zinc at that time and made the closest thing he could to a zinc. So the frame of the car looks like a zinc, which is arguably the most successful Formula V platform of all time. There's pictures of this car racing at Daytona in the 60s. This raced, I believe, in Nassau in the Bahamas in a Formula V challenge. So it has some pretty cool history.
Can you just explain why it's what's Formula V? That would
Yeah,
be interesting.
so this is known as a Formula V because it's all Volkswagen-derived components. So in order to keep this class of racing affordable, the rules are very strict, and all of the pieces are based off of a Volkswagen Beetle. So if you look at the front axle or the front beam, this is a modified front beam from a Volkswagen Beetle. I believe the third torsion tube on the top has been removed. If you look at the engine, it's just an air-cooled Volkswagen Beetle engine. It's a very strictly built engine. The rules for building the engines, there's not a lot of leeway. So a great performing Volkswagen Beetle engine, and one of these makes, what, 62 horsepower.
And an insanely good one is 62 horsepower.
Yeah, and the
And
difference
that's all
in
out
price.
of a 40 horsepower block. I mean, when you bought the Volkswagen new, it was 40 horsepower. So somehow machinists and engine builders have managed to squeeze another 20 horsepower out of Volkswagen components.
Yep. And in a modern Formula V, they don't have to run the fan shroud on their engines. They can get somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 or 75 horsepower. It also lets you make a more compact body, so it's more aerodynamic. But for what this was, it was a pretty cool race car for the 1960s.
You know, you can see in the Cotter household, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I remember driving around with Brian, maybe in an old Porsche, the MG we have, and he was probably 3.5 or 4 years old. And we were driving to the country, like just driving, having a nice time driving to the country. And we pulled to a gas station to get gas, and there was an old, rusty, maybe a '49 Chevy pickup truck. And it was just a piece of junk. And I remember I'm filling up gas, and Brian said, "Dad, why don't we buy that old truck and we could fix it up?" I was like, wow, this is like natural. I didn't have to teach him this. It came naturally. So anyway, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I'm really proud of him. He's making a living in the automotive business right now, working for a major German car company.
Skipped home early for this this video too, so thanks for getting me out of work.
So you're buying dinner tonight.
Yeah.
Happy hunting.